write in questions at any time during the program by using the chat button at the bottom of your screen. Responses to your questions will be at the end of the presentation. While we are used to providing in-person educational programming, one of the unusual benefits of having to actually physically distance is that it allows people who are geographically distanced already to participate. For example, we're pleased that Janet Morin, former owner and keeper of one of our historic Samuel Lane houses in Stratham, is with us tonight from the Carolinas. Our newest lifetime Stratham Historical Society member, Craig Stinson, is joining us from Oklahoma while he takes a break from studying his Pottle family ancestors in Stratham and his Hill family ancestors in Newmarket. Helen Lefebvre researched and authored the Stratham publication of Images of America. She is back in Stratham tonight. And I'm particularly excited to welcome Stratham Historical Society founder and long-term president, Barbara Mann, who is linked in from her Maryland home this great evening. Tonight's presenter, who you can see on the screen, is Erica Linderman. She originally hails from Delaware, making stops in North Carolina, New York City, and Western Massachusetts before landing in New Hampshire. Erica is a third-year PhD student at UNH. She received her undergraduate degree from Smith College in 2018, where she was an Ada Comstock Scholar, a program at Smith for non-traditional students. Erica double majored in history and theater. She entered UNH as a modern American historian with a focus on women and gender during World War I. However, after getting to know the gentleman who is the topic of tonight's discussion, Erica switched disciplines. She is now an early American historian focusing on white supremacy in New England during the early Republic. In conjunction with her studies, Erica has served as both teaching assistant and research assistant to History Department lecturer and museum coordinator, Dr. Kimberly Alexander, who I believe is also on board for the presentation tonight. If Kimberly's name is at all familiar to you, you might remember her from her Stratham Historical Society presentation back in September of 2019, Fashioning the 18th Century Family. Kimberly's visit led Erica to apply to the Stratham Historical Society for its Winfield Foote graduate level degree and award for excellence. And Erica turned out to be our highest scholarship award winner in 2020. Without further delay, I'm giving you Erica Linderman, who will in turn give you Wentworth Cheswill. Welcome, Erica.
Thank you, Skip. My goodness, that's quite the introduction. I really want to thank the Stratham Historical Society and in particular the Winfield L Foote Award Committee. I am beyond grateful for the incredibly generous award you gave to me and for the opportunity to talk about my work tonight. I'm also grateful for the opportunity to have to wear something other than the Newmarket Historical Society as well for giving me access to the Wentworth Cheswill papers. And I want to say that I look forward to continuing that relationship as well, particularly as this project expands. So, Wentworth Cheswill. As Skip mentioned, I was introduced to Cheswill by Professor Kimberly Alexander, whose name is being mentioned a lot tonight that she probably wasn't expecting. And she, bless her heart, after listening to me lament about having no idea what to write about for an early American history research seminar, she said, "Hey, I know of these papers. Who am I to look a gift horse in the mouth?" I said, "Great, I'll look at them." And they were some of Wentworth Cheswill's papers. As Skip mentioned, when I started this project, I was a modern American historian. So I was feeling a bit out of my league as I began this project, but I was pretty quickly intrigued by this small town New Hampshire man who used to live right up the road from where I live now. And before I started this work, when I was new to town, I drove by the historical marker about him on South Main Street in Newmarket dozens of times. And being new and an historian, every time I passed, I'd say, I should probably stop and read, the historical marker. I finally did, but it wasn't until after I started this project. And when I did stop, let's see if I can, oops, that's not working. Hang on. Do that. There it is. There's the historical marker. When I finally did stop, the same thing that piqued my curiosity about Wentworth Cheswill when I started this project stood out to me on this historical marker. And the whole marker reads like pretty much any other New England historical marker about extraordinary individuals. It's their list of accomplishments, what they did for the area, what they're famous for, etc. Except here, there's that very last line. His grandfather, Richard, was listed as Negro. The ease with which that detail is added at the end is fascinating. And it's there almost as if to say, oh, by the way. And yet, the ramifications of that statement are enormous, especially when you consider the historical context of Wentworth Cheswill's life. If his grandfather was Black, that meant that he was a person of color as well. A man of mixed ancestry was not only the town school teacher, he was also elected to hold public office and was a business owner during a period of time when slavery was rampant throughout the colonies and the issue of race was on the tip of many tongues. Even in New Hampshire, race mattered during this period. So in the case of this historic marker, why was the fact that Cheswill came from mixed ancestry a seeming side note? For someone reading the marker, their first reaction might be, wait, he was a person of color? However, I came to this work from sort of the other direction. I had known that Cheswill was of mixed ancestry because the first thing I landed on when I started this project was a speech given by New Hampshire Senator David L. Morrill on the Senate floor in 1820, which was 3 years after Cheswill died. In this speech, Senator Morrill said, quote, in New Hampshire, there was a yellow man by the name of Cheswill who, with his family, were respectable in points of abilities, property, and character. And I'll be discussing this speech a little bit later. But imagine my surprise after reading that speech when I found out that Wentworth Cheswill had registered himself as white on the federal census. So my first reaction was, wait, he's a person of color. The questions began to pile up in my brain. Why would Wentworth Cheswill choose to categorize himself as white? Why, 3 years after his death, did Senator Morrill choose to out him as a man of mixed ancestry? And further, because Cheswill served in so many public roles, including as Justice of the Peace, was the community he served socially conscious of his race? My work seeks to unpack these questions and more by exploring the deep roots of white supremacy in New England. More specifically, I examine how the fragility of white supremacy, the ideology that undergirds all forms of racism and that places whiteness at the apex of racial hierarchy, that fragility is actually its strength. I hesitate to use this metaphor, but I'm going to roll with it here. So white supremacy is kind of like a virus that has become immune to a vaccine. It has the ability to shift and morph when it's threatened by that which seeks to destroy it. White supremacy is, as historian George Fredrickson describes it, quote, a fluid, variable, and open-ended process. So using this understanding of white supremacy as being fluid and malleable, a larger goal of this work is to continue to dismantle the monolithic notion of the North as being good and the South as being bad. It's often thought that white supremacy and racist ideology were the sole purview of the Southern states, especially in the decades leading up to the Civil War. However, numerous scholars have demonstrated the fallacy in such ideas, exposing the North as being just as complicit in white supremacy and racism as the South. Indeed, white supremacy was not and could not be contained by regional boundaries and had particular manifestations in each. Fredrickson's work on white supremacy is particularly helpful in explaining why both white Northerners and white Southerners held beliefs of the inferiority of Black people, but that neither could sort of agree on how to reconcile those beliefs. Generally speaking, the Southern antidote was clear: enslavement and subjugation were their solution. For the North, though, their solution was a little bit more ambiguous, sort of while maintaining the moral high ground of condemning slavery and abolishing it, before the South did, and also purporting equality for all citizens. Northerners, particularly legislators like Senator Morrill, exhibited their white supremacy in different ways. So putting Wentworth Cheswill's life in conversation with Senator Morrill's life and the speech he gave in 1820 provides a lens through which the fluidity of white supremacy can be examined, in particular, the ways that racism and white supremacy affected each of these men's lives. Now, Wentworth Cheswill, aside from like the basics, really. He was born in Newmarket, New Hampshire in 1746. He died of typhus in 1817, just before his 71st birthday. He was among the first graduates from the prestigious Dummer Academy, which is now the Governor's Academy, in Byfield, Massachusetts. Upon returning from Massachusetts, he became the local school teacher. And then after gaining the esteem of his town, he was eventually elected as town selectman and also served as the assessor, the coroner, and eventually as a justice of the peace for Rockingham County. In 1767, he married Mary Davis, and together they had 13 children. He served in the Revolutionary War under Colonel John Langdon at Saratoga, and here is an image of the Revolutionary War rolls. And you can see, here's Wentworth Cheswill here. Interestingly, most of the people that served, and this is for another paper and another time, were all paid the same wages despite social standing or their status, their rank, actually. He also operated a small store, which is still in town. This is the plaque on the outside of the store. As you can see, it says it was originally located on South Street near the engine house. Well, the engine house is directly behind you if you're looking at this plaque. So it was on the other side of the street originally. So he owned and operated this small store. He also helped to found the first local library. Wentworth Cheswill was also a very wealthy man. He purchased his first piece of land from his father, Hopestill, in 1765. By 1767, he owned 30 acres of land, and by 1770, he owned 114. Now, his father, Hopestill, was a respected housewright and carpenter in the area. He played a part in the construction of the Bell Tavern in Portsmouth, which I don't believe is standing anymore. And he also aided in building a couple of important houses, including what is known today as the John Paul Jones House, pictured here, which is the home to the Portsmouth Historical Society. Through his work, he was able to amass quite a bit of land, a little over 100 acres, and secured part of a fall and mill privilege at Wadley's Falls. He was married to a white woman, Catherine Keniston, and together they had their only son, Wentworth. Hopestill's wealth and business acumen are equally interesting because he was the son of an enslaved man. Hopestill's father and Wentworth's grandfather, Richard, was a Black man enslaved by David Lawrence of Exeter, New Hampshire. Richard Cheswill was manumitted by Lawrence in 1709 and is purported to be the first Black man to purchase land in New Hampshire in 1717. Though there is much speculation on the life of Richard, it is presumed that he impregnated a white woman, though didn't marry. And because of the law at the time, any child of his would follow the status of the mother. So therefore, Hopestill was born free. And despite the fact that much of his life remains unknown, including his birth and death dates, it does appear that he was a part of several land transactions in Newmarket, which sort of laid the foundation for his son and grandson to lead prosperous lives in the area. And Wentworth Cheswill did just that. The grandson of an enslaved man became one of his town's most prominent members. A person of mixed ancestry rose to the upper echelons of society and lived his life, in fact, claimed his life as a white man. In a world where he was surrounded by social and cultural markers that made it very clear what it meant to be a person of color in New Hampshire, Wentworth Cheswill consciously chose whiteness. Formed whiteness. But if Senator Morrill was able to categorize him as someone of mixed ancestry in his speech, just how passing was Wentworth Cheswill? It's assumed that because his mother and grandmother were both white, that he was light-skinned. Unfortunately, to my knowledge, there are no extant images of Wentworth Cheswill. So it's really sort of impossible to know what his skin color was. Regardless, historian Winthrop Jordan notes, passing was a conspiracy of silence, not only for the individual, but for a society which had drawn a rigid color line based on visibility. Passing for white required not only the person attempting to pass, but also the society within which they lived to participate. For example, in the diary of Stephen Peabody, a fellow student of Cheswill's at Dummer Academy, Peabody wrote of an evening that Samuel Phillips, Moses Hale, and Cheswill all lodged in his bed while he and another schoolmate slept elsewhere. Either his teacher and schoolmates didn't care that he was of mixed ancestry and participated in him passing as white, or they didn't know. However, Peabody's entry the following day is a bit more telling. Quote, "At night we had a great deal of sport, seeing 3 Negroes handle a squaw." Clearly, for Peabody, there was a significant distinction between Cheswill and the people he described in his diary. And Peabody obviously found amusement at the expense of people of color, at least in this instance. Because Peabody was a friend of Cheswill's, it could be assumed that Cheswill knew of his friend's feelings about people of color, perhaps reinforcing the self-preservation of performing as white that Cheswill had practiced in his life already. And clearly, Cheswill was also very active in politics and the growing movement towards the revolution against Britain. In 1776, a loyal every man over the age of 20 to sign it, by which they, quote, "solemnly engaged and promised that they would, to the utmost of their power, oppose the hostile proceedings of the British fleets and armies." Wentworth Cheswill signed the association test, which in and of itself, not terribly surprising, except this is the association test. Rather, the language of the association test. In it, so the Continental Congress, who sent out the document to each colony, asked that, and it's this sort of section here, all males above 21 years of age, lunatics, idiots, and Negroes accepted, to sign to the declaration on this paper. So as someone of mixed ancestry, was Cheswill even allowed to sign this document? He did. Here is his signature here. Once again, Cheswill made a choice. And as I said early on, Cheswill registered himself as white on every census that was taken in his lifetime. This is an image of the 1790 New Hampshire census. 1790 is the first year of the federal census. So this first column is, here's Wentworth right here. And the first column is free white male of 16 years and upwards. The second column, third column is free white females. the fourth, all other free persons, the fifth, slaves, and the sixth, total. As you can see here, Wentworth Cheswill claims 3 free white males of 16 years and upwards, 1 white male under 16, and 7 free white females. Fun fact, this is Wentworth Cheswill's handwriting. As part of his duties as a scrivener and being one of New Hampshire's first historians, he transcribed many pieces of local and state documents for historical posterity. Cheswill did, in fact, live the majority of his life in Newmarket, and as I've said, was incredibly active within his community as town selectman and assessor and coroner, etc. So he would have known that there were enslaved people in Newmarket. According to the 1775 census, there were 17 people listed as, quote, Negroes and slaves for life in Newmarket. And in 1790, Rockingham County, for which Cheswill was a justice of the peace. Additionally, runaway slave ads were ubiquitous in local newspapers, like this one from the New Hampshire Gazette in 1766. It reads, "Run away from his master, John Moody of Newmarket, a Negro man named Neptune, about 28 or 9 years of age, had on a homemade coat, the forepart lined with red shalloon, a green jacket, a new pair of shoes, and blue yarn stockings. Has lost 2 of his toes and can't move his underjaw. If any person will take up said runaway and return him to his master or secure him that he may have him again, he shall be allowed for charges and be satisfied for his trouble. By me, the subscriber, Newmarket, April 21, John Moody." Cheswill, being very well educated and well respected, would likely have read one of the most circulated newspapers in the area and would have seen ads like this one or another ad asked about a mulatto man who had run away from his enslaver in Kittery. Perhaps he would have even seen this ad from the Gazette on June 3rd in 1774. It describes a runaway man named Cato who has, quote, a yellow complexion. A little less than 50 years later, in a very public forum, Wentworth Cheswill would be described the exact same way. A man who lived his entire life as white would be posthumously designated as a person of color on the floor of the United States Senate. Cheswill's legacy was forever altered by Senator Morrill's speech. An exemplary citizen of Newmarket because of his service became an exemplary citizen of Newmarket because he performed that service while being a person of mixed ancestry. And the speech that Senator Morrill gave, and this is Senator David L. Morrill. So the speech that he gave, in which he names Wentworth Cheswill and outs him as a person of color, was part of the ongoing debates that made up the Missouri Compromise. In December of 1820, the 16th Congress of the United States assembled to debate the proposed Constitution from the legislature of Missouri. In what had been a racially charged argument since the beginnings of the Missouri Compromise debates a couple years earlier, US senators once again took to the floor to argue the legitimacy and constitutionality of the nascent state's proposed constitution. The Missouri Compromise stipulated that Missouri would enter the Union as a slave state and Maine would enter as a free state. In addition to Missouri's status as a space for the legal enslavement of people of color, the representatives of Missouri wanted to make crystal clear how they felt about those people. Article 3, Section 26 of their proposed constitution stated, quote, that it shall be the duty of the General Assembly of the state to pass such laws as may be necessary, among other things, to prevent free Negroes and mulattoes from coming into and settling in this state under any pretext whatsoever. Not surprisingly, some Northern senators, Senator Morrill included, took considerable umbrage at this clause for myriad reasons, not the least of which was that it was unconstitutional because it went against the Privileges and Immunities Clause in the United States Constitution. Article 4, Section 2 of the US Constitution, which is the Privileges and Immunities Clause, states that the citizens of each state shall be entitled to all privileges and immunities of citizens in the several states. This clause is meant to protect the fundamental rights of individual citizens and restrains, state efforts to discriminate against out-of-state citizens. However, couched within the unconstitutionality argument was the issue of race and racial identification. And with tensions rising over the proposed state constitution of Missouri, Senator Morrill took the floor. In his speech that lasted the better part of a day, Senator Morrill argued not only about the constitutionality of the clause contained in Missouri's constitution, but also invoked Wentworth Cheswill as an upstanding citizen, but one who was of mixed ancestry. By all accounts, it appears that Senator Morrill was fighting the so-called good fight. However, Morrill's thoughts on issues of race are a bit more complicated. Now, before entering politics, David L. Morrill was a doctor and minister. He studied at Phillips Exeter Academy and later studied medicine with his stepfather. And though he practiced medicine in both Massachusetts and New Hampshire, during that time, Morrill became interested in theology and sought out the Reverend Jesse Remington of Candia, New Hampshire, to study divinity. Morrill would be ordained as a Presbyterian congregational pastor in Goffstown, New Hampshire in 1802, where he would serve until 1809. And though his career as a pastor was relatively short-lived, his religious background informed his ideology for the rest of his life, especially as it pertained to issues of race. David L. Morrill was elected to the US Senate in 1817 and was vehemently anti-slavery, as his Congregationalist beliefs espoused that human beings were all God's creatures. However, white supremacy lurked beneath his egalitarian exterior, as Morrill shared in the sentiment of Black inferiority. In an 1818 speech before the US Senate during the initial debates, the initial Missouri Compromise debates, Morrill stated that people of color were in desperate need of moral reform and education in the ways of citizenry. He declared that, quote, though Black, they are human beings in human shape, pardon me. That is not their crime, but their misfortune, end quote. So even though Black people are his fellow human beings, because of their misfortune, they don't stand on equal footing with white people. Their Blackness makes them inherently inferior. In light of his speech given 2 years later, espousing the upstanding qualities of people of mixed ancestry, Morrill's views are complicated, though they're not surprising, considering that he was also president of the New Hampshire Auxiliary Committee to the American Colonization Society. The American Colonization Society was founded in 1816 by Charles Fenton Mercer, Henry Clay, Daniel Webster, and other notables. And the goal of the ACS was to establish a colony in Africa where people of color could be repatriated and hence removed from the United States. Operating under the auspices of benevolence, members of the ACS, including Morrill, through their participation with the organization, revealed their racism and beliefs in white superiority. To be sure, colonizationalists were anti-slavery. However, as historian Winthrop Jordan argues, colonization was an emancipationist scheme calculated primarily to benefit the emancipators. The point of colonization was to remove people of color from the United States, supposedly for the betterment of both societies. But it was white society that would reap the true benefits. And Morrill's association with the ACS is very interesting. The redemption and moral uplift were of great import to him. Because of his membership with the ACS, his moral veracity does come into question a bit. And it's actually complicated even further because by being a member, he supported the premise that undergirded the colonization society, that people of color deserved freedom, but that they could not live among white people. So why were Africans and African Americans not welcome in Morrell's vision of the United States, but that Senator Morrell named in his speech that day as an upstanding citizen? He also named Lemuel Haynes of Vermont and Thomas Paul of Boston, calling both of them mulatto. They were both of mixed ancestry. And so that brings me back to one of the questions I posed in the beginning of this talk, which is, how did Senator Morrell know these guys? And it made a skosh more sense to me that Morrell would know who Cheswill was because they were from the same area and both were alive for some of the same time. But how did he know that he was a person of color? I have a theory. If you recall, the man that enslaved Cheswill's grandfather, Richard, was named David Lawrence. Senator David L. Morrell's full name? David Lawrence Morrell. Please forgive the crudeness of this next slide. It's really hard to make a family tree on Microsoft Word. Anyway, well, there is probably just one piece of evidence missing. Everything that I have gleaned points to Senator Morrell's great-grandfather, David Lawrence, being the man that enslaved Wentworth Cheswill's grandfather, Richard Cheswill. Here's David Lawrence Morrell, his parents, Anna and Samuel, their parents, David Lawrence Jr. and David Lawrence Sr. The plot thickens. This work is by no means complete. And it feels like every time I come close to answering a question, 5 to 10 more appear, which I'm gathering is the nature of the beast. In fact, this presentation is a piece of what will be my dissertation to come, which will also include the lives of Lemuel Haynes and Thomas Paul, the two other gentlemen that Senator Morrell mentioned in his speech, along with Wentworth Cheswill. And as I mentioned, and as Skip also mentioned, at the start of this talk, I was a modern American historian when this started. I have since switched disciplines. Some would say that I've gone to the dark side, and have completely changed the trajectory of my work and probably my life going forward. And Wentworth Cheswill doubtless affected numerous lives in his 70+ years on this earth. And now, more than 200 years later, he continues to affect and change lives. His legacy lives on. Thank you so much. Skip, I will turn it over to you.
Actually, I think there may be a few questions in the chat box.
Okay.
And
Oh, right. Let me.
Before you take a look at that, let me offer a piece of low-hanging fruit for you.
Okay.
During the presentation, and as I have come to know Wentworth Cheswill, we see two spellings of Cheswill, one with ELL and one with ILL. And I didn't know if you were prepared to comment at all on your observations there.
Both ways, interchangeably, all over the place. I think a lot of it had to do with who was transcribing whomever's handwriting. So whether it could be regarded as an I or an E, I think, you know, if the, I'm trying to think, there was something very, most people I think spell it with an I. Most of the books that are written about him spell it with an E. In the speech, in the transcription of his speech, of Senator Morrell's speech on the floor, it is an E.
Right.
So it's whatever you feel like.
Yeah.
Oh my God,
He's
an Comstock scholar.
I came to see it as WELL almost exclusively until we then looked at his plaque. And then we looked at his gravestones, which, by the way, are located right by the plaque.
Yep.
And family grave sites are there as well. And then there are a bunch of written documents, including deeds, that are all spelled with ILL. And so it almost seems as though that's the way it was naturally, but it got moved around a little bit thereafter.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. All right.
So I see the questions are mounting quickly, so I'll back off and let you take a peek at the chat box questions.
Well, first, let me comment on, is it Helen, who's a Smithy and an Ada? That makes me very happy. Let's see, that question has been answered. Oh, so okay, so that's interesting. Patricia says that she Googled Wentworth Cheswill and she sees images of a man who looks more like a person of color than white. What's interesting is that when you do Google Wentworth Cheswill, images of Frederick Douglass show up. Images of Toussaint Louverture show up. Pretty much a lot of famous Black guys show up, but none that are confirmed to be Wentworth Cheswill. So it's frustrating, but that's none of those images, to my knowledge, have been confirmed to be of him. Do I know the year he began at Dummer? I want to say that I don't remember if it was exactly 1763. I have it written down somewhere, but he was either in the first or second class at Dummer Academy. Are there, yes, Lucy, there are. In fact, I believe there is Wentworth Cheswill's great ×9 granddaughter is meant to be here this evening. And yeah, I will for sure make them a part of my research down the road. Oh, John, yes. Yes, there they are. I should continue scrolling before I start answering. Man, it's like I'm not even needed. Okay, so I guess, are there any?
Erica, I don't know if everybody is able to actually read or has chosen to find a way to read all of the comments, but I think what we're now hearing is that some of our Cheswill descendants are here tonight for the program.
Yeah, to my knowledge, I don't know if I have a way to see exactly who is here. I was told that, as I said, his great ×9 granddaughter was meant to be here this evening. Krista Robertson, yes, should be here. Krista, are you here? I don't want to put you on the spot, but I guess I kind of am. So
I did just unmute myself. Can you hear me?
Oh, hello.
There you are.
Hi, this is Krista.
Hi, Krista.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing well.
This is okay. So here's a Wentworth Cheswill descendant. And did I hear that?
Yeah, there are a lot of us.
I would believe it. Do you know how many live locally? Do you know?
In my line, particularly in New Hampshire, Maine area, oh geez, let's see. There's 13 of us in my generation, and there were 4 in my father's, 2 in my grandfather's. I'm going to say there's probably about 40 of us just in my line right in this area. There's many others, some in Newmarket and things that come down from other lines. But yeah, there are a lot of us.
And so I'm looking at Lucy's question. So did you grow up knowing about Wentworth, or is this a family story that's been passed down from generations, or was this a later discovery?
No, this was a little bit later of a discovery. I was actually researching a gentleman that lived in Dover, and his wife's name just happened to be Cheswill. And I posted something online in a chat saying, these are the people I'm researching. I'm specifically interested in this marriage. And everything exploded from there. And that was probably back around 2000, so 20 something years ago. And so I've known about him about 20 years.
Wow. That's so cool. Is there any, I mean,
Yeah.
is there anything else we need to know? Any fun family facts?
Well, it's like he said, I was 9th generation granddaughter, I believe. And my father actually had sickle cell anemia. So the traits carry very far down the line from Richard.
Wow.
And they're still showing up in the family. So
that's incredible. That's incredible. Holy cow.
There's another person who, along with me, does a lot of interesting things with Cheswill. And one of our missions has actually been finding where all of his family, especially his children, are. We've driven all over trying to find one of the sons, Samuel, who still eludes us. And we do a lot of adventures. And the most recent thing that has come up was we actually found a marriage intention in Boston for Richard Cheswill, Negro, to a Negro woman down there as well. So that's going to be our next avenue when things open back up again, is to get down into the Boston area to find out if this is our Richard and if he ever did marry after he left New Hampshire. And that's possibly why we can't find a grave for Richard anywhere either.
Wow. Okay. Well, Krista, you're going to be hearing from me quite a bit.
Not a problem.
We're going to become fast friends here.
You have my email address.
I do. I have it, and I am going to use it. Everybody is witnessing this all happening in front of me. That's kind of weird.
Certainly.
I'm so glad you could be here tonight. That's so awesome.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, for sure. Let's see. Trying to see if I've missed. Any idea where the first name Wentworth came from? Connection? It's possible. I don't have any confirmation that there. I believe it's in the book Black Portsmouth, I think, where they make mention that it is possible that Wentworth was named after a Wentworth. There's nothing to confirm that. I mean, it was obviously a very happening name in this area at that time. Can I touch upon his ride north while Revere Road West? Sure. So part of the story, which I didn't mention, is that Wentworth Cheswill was part of the local safety committee. And it is rumored, though not confirmed, that he was a part of Paul Revere's sort of midnight riders. There's no confirmation saying if he did in fact ride with Paul Revere. There's no confirmation saying that he, which direction he rode. So it's one of the more rampant rumors about Wentworth Cheswill, and I left it out mostly because I have yet to find anything absolutely concrete about it. So no, I haven't found confirmation of that tale. Let's see.
I think there's a question about do you know where his parents are buried?
Actually, I don't.
They're not part of the graveyard in Newmarket.
No, they're not. The graveyard in Newmarket is he and his wife, some of his children, not all, and I believe nieces and a nephew, I believe, if my memory serves me.
Can I interject again?
Of course.
We do know that the family that lives right next to the graveyard has been there for many generations. And the woman that is currently living there remembers running around and playing in the graveyard as a child. And there were many more headstones there at the time that are gone now. There is a particular section on the back at the far right where there are indentations that look like there were 3 graves there that have sunk in now. We did have somebody come in and do like one of those sonar things into the ground. So we definitely know there was something there, but there are no longer markers to let us know who they were. But we have a feeling that the graveyard was started with Cheswill, Hope Still and Catherine being buried there. And then Cheswill spent his life building up around that because he was still building the stone wall when he was in his 60s. And we believe they were probably the first two people interred there, but everything's been lost to time. The type of stone that could have been used is disintegrated and gone back or has been stolen or something at this point. But there's nothing we have been able to find that actually says where they're interred.
Wow. This is so cool. I can't get over how cool this is. This is why I do what I do, guys. This is so cool. Oh, yeah. Okay, so Richard mentioned, so I guess that was a rumor started in a 1908 Granite Monthly about his ride north. So I am pretty sure he was a member of the safety committee, although I guess I don't know what those details entail. I think other questions? I think I've covered pretty much everything, unless I'm missing something. Whoop. Phillips. Yes. Yes. I'm sick. Well, you guys can answer. So John Herman has made a really great comment here and asked if I've considered that David Morrill attended Phillips Exeter Academy and could have learned of Cheswill there. It's possible. In my presentation, you noted that Sam Phillips shared a bed with Cheswill. Sam Phillips went on to establish Phillips Andover. Yep. And his benefactor uncle, John, both established very progressive schools noted for accepting Black students. Philip Andover and Phillips Exeter became magnets for people of color after the Revolutionary War, and David Morrill attended. Did any other fellow students mention him? So the Stephen Peabody diary was published in and of itself. I have yet to get down to, I think they actually call it the Pesco Library at the Governor's Academy, mostly because of the world as it is. So I don't know if there are other student accounts that his diary only mentions Wentworth those 2 times. So if other students mention him, it's possible. I don't know if those papers exist. There you go. Oh, I'm glad you got excited. Get out. Oh my God, this is amazing. Sharon, I'm gonna be in touch soon.
Good.
This is crazy.
Any other comments or questions? This has been quite an exciting evening. We are so excited to have had family members appear this evening and to participate the way you all have. Thank you very much for being with us. Kimberly Alexander, thank you very much for being here and particularly for introducing us to Erica. Erica, thank you for your scholarship.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your passion. We understand why you're smitten with Wentworth, and we're grateful that you are. You did a great job tonight. We very much appreciate it. We wish you all the best as you close in on your doctorate.
Thank you.
And we hope once you achieve your PhD that you won't be too far from us, and we'll find a way to stop by the Stratham Historical Society.
Absolutely, Skip. Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for being here. This was awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Skip. Thank you, Erica.
Thank you.
Our pleasure. Thank you all, and have a
Tricia.
great night. Thank you,
Thanks,
particularly to
Tricia.
Tricia as well.
Yes, indeed.
Great job facilitating all of this.
Good night.
Good night, all.